Hello, everybody. A warm welcome to Wisdom from North. Today, we're going to speak about love and relationship and how to attract the love of your life. And I believe I have one of the leading experts in the world on the field, Katherine Woodward Thomas. Katherine is a life coach, a speaker, a licensed psychotherapist, and she is the best-selling author of the book Calling in the One: 7 Weeks of to Attract the Love of Your Life, a bestseller. Katherine, welcome to Wisdom from North. It's an honor having you here.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you.
And I've actually followed you for many years, and it took me 2.5 years to get an interview with you. So I'm very happy to finally have an interview. Because, the subject of love is mysterious, I find. And of course, we all have an issue towards love. So, what I want to start with is just jumping right into it. Do you believe that we all have a soulmate?
I actually believe that we all have several soulmates. And I don't mean that just in the romantic term, but I think soulmate is a broader term than we're used to applying it, that we have a very narrow definition of how to experience soulmate love. But I think that best friends can be our soulmates, our children can be our soulmates, our parents, our dear friends, our coworkers. We can find, a home in each other's hearts according to various purposes of different relationships across the board. I also think there's something waking up in us where we have soul tribes, where we find our people who are really kind of aligned with our mission and aligned with our vision of what's possible and aligned with helping us to grow spiritually. And I think that's the feeling. Some people walk into maybe a spiritual community and they suddenly feel like, oh, I'm relaxed here, I'm at home here. Something in me wakes up when I walk into this community of people. And I think that the deepest hunger in us is to find those homes in each other's hearts.
But what about the romantic soulmate, or the one that the one? Like, is it something that is the one? Does that exist, the one?
Well, sure. I mean, that's what we're kind of questing for, is that deep soul resonance. And that's what we've really come to. I would say even expect of our partner, and finding that kind of a resonance on the deepest level and across many lines. We want an intellectual companion. We want someone who is going to create a lifestyle that we want to be living. We want someone who's sexually compatible and emotionally available, and someone who lights us up and has the same spiritual visions as we do, and even a similar sense of humor, so that we want to have this experience of depth and connectivity that's pretty constant and across the board. I think that's the hunger that's waking up. And I am so thrilled to be supporting each of us to take that stand. But the first line of Calling in the One says to us that one reason that so many of us do not yet have the relationship that we are longing to have is because we've not yet become the people that we would need to be in order to attract and then sustain that level of love. So, which is an interesting thing, you see, because this longing for a soulmate is a relatively new longing. If we think back to, 50 years ago, or back in the 60s, back in the 50s, people didn't really have that expectations for a partner. In fact, there was a study that was done in the 1960s where people were interviewed. I think it was, women, mostly women who were leaving college, who were young women going out into the world. And they said, if you met a man who met all of your criteria for a husband, but you did not love him, would you marry him? And close to 90% said yes, they would. That would never happen now, because we're not, we want all those external things, but what we're really hungry for is a soul connection. We want to be emotionally met. We want to be spiritually inspired. This is a new kind of emergent hunger, and it's requiring that we grow and develop ourselves to be able to create this level of love.
Okay, I want to go back a little bit, still talking or trying to find out about the one, because I actually interviewed Ariel Ford about it, and she's talking about, your soulmate. And so I'm wondering, in a way that, okay, I'm single, so let's take me as an example, as I always do. Is there someone out there for me, like one person that is the best fit in a way?
Well, I'll make it more complex. So let me just say on a broad scale, because you're really looking for a definition of who that soulmate is. And I think it's somebody that you do feel deeply at home with, which I think is something that my dear friend Ariel would say. Someone that you feel like you can be yourself with totally. I might add that it's also a mission partner, that you have a shared vision, shared values, because that's what's going to make that partnership viable for the long haul, where you can actually grow together, that you're moving in the same direction. And that's going to be, a very critical thing, particularly in our world where people are growing and changing so much, which really you have to remember, 500, 600 years ago in the world was not happening. 500 or 600 years ago, if you were born into a family, your mother was a maid, you were going to become a maid, you were going to die a maid, your daughter was going to be a maid. Like that was it. There was no upward mobility. There wasn't education available the way that it is now. We are moving and changing in a way that previous generations never have. So it becomes more important to find that partner who's going to grow and develop with you. But I will also add that according to what it is that where you are in your own growth and development, you're going to have almost a different criteria for what you're looking for. And so we're grappling with this happily ever after myth, because even that is shifting and changing. And you will hear many people, and I do conscious uncoupling also, and one of the things that I explore in conscious uncoupling is the happily ever after story that is so near and dear to all of our hearts. Yeah. We all want the happily ever after story. But you see that story was only really created about 400 years ago, when the lifespan was 35 years old. So can you, okay.
That's so interesting.
Can we create, a longevity? Well, certainly we can have that in our vision, but then you better be really sure. Similar vision and similar goals. Right? Because what's happening is that at different points in our lives, we're all changing so much that we have different needs at different levels of development. At some point, we have a need to heal our childhood wounds. At another point in life, we have a need to create our own family. At another point in life, we might have a need to make our mark in the world and to make our greatest contribution. So would it be great to have one mate through all of that? Oh, that's the ideal. But we're repositioning in conscious uncoupling. We're kind of challenging the idea that if a relationship ends before one or both people die, that it's essentially a failure.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, let's just talk a little bit about that, since you're bringing it up, so people can understand what unconscious uncoupling is. Like, so you're actually having courses now, and you're writing a book, I think, about, the breakup. Like, why did you come to that? Why from, calling in the one to the breakup part?
Well, first of all, conscious uncoupling is coming out in America and in September of 2015. But where are you? Which country? You're in Denmark?
Norway.
You're in Norway. Okay. So I talk about Scandinavia as actually in many ways around breakups a much more enlightened society than America. In America, breakups and divorce can be quite nasty business. It's a big business here in America. It's kind of a $50 billion a year industry with a lot of power struggles over custody fights and who's going to pay for what, and it can get very gnarly. And so there's but for the most part, if conscious uncoupling is not advocating for separation, but it is offering an alternative. If you are going to separate, then there's a way to do it well, where minimal damage is done to people. There's a way that people are honoring of the love that was shared, so that the love just changes form. It's not killed off. It changes form. So because at the end of the day, I'm all about love and relationship. And so I went into the center with conscious uncoupling to an area that tends to get very gnarly. And particularly if people are extremely bonded, and on a lot of different levels, those breakups can be so painful, where the rupture of attachment is so deeply painful. And so I see it actually as a precursor to Calling in the One. The Conscious Uncoupling program is online right now. People can find out by going to consciousuncoupling.com. But I'm very excited about the book coming out. And but I see it as a precursor, because sometimes when people have a very heartbreaking breakup, it's hard to open to new love. It's hard to trust yourself going into relationship. And so a lot of Calling in the One and conscious uncoupling is about clearing away the obstacles to being able to create the relationship that we are really, truly hungry for.
So let's talk about that, because I had a very interesting conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, actually. And she was like, I was like, it's all about this list, because Ariel Ford spoke about this list that I should, write that I want this and that and this and that. And she was saying, no, you have to just let go and let the universe or life surprise you, because he might not look like the way you think. And I read your book, and you were saying kind of the same, that you were surprised when you met your loved one. So this makes me confused. Like, how to attract?
So let me say what the value of the list is. The value of the list is you're getting clear about your desire, and you're not giving the universe mixed messages. But the responsibility you have in making the list is that you want to concern yourself, not with running out to find that person, but you want to make sure that your focus is on becoming the person you would need to be in order to really match the person you're wanting to bring in. So your focus is on your own growth and development. Because let's say, and this happens for a lot of people, somebody makes a list and they want somebody who's really fit and very successful and, very creative and really engaged in life and very high functioning and has a great sense of humor. And meanwhile, you're kind of at a job you don't really like very much. You've kind of got that extra 20 pounds on you that you're just putting off doing anything about. You're, isolating a little bit with, the Haagen-Dazs ice cream. Maybe, you're not living your A life. And what would happen, truthfully, is if you met the person that's on your list, you would feel inadequate. You might even, kind of blow it up because you don't feel really ready. You don't feel good enough for that person. So the emphasis on Calling in the One is on becoming your best self and creating your best life so that you feel authentically confident, you're at your best, you're in your strength, because you're going to attract a whole different caliber of person into your life. From that place of strength and integrity in your own being. So we go through, it's a 49-day program, the book itself, where I take you through, you get clear about your purpose in life. You get into integrity with the future that you're committed to creating. See, a lot of us want something. It's different to want something than to really commit to having something, to creating something with the universe. And so Calling in the One is about getting into alignment with the future that you're committed to creating. So if you're making that list, the second list you need to make is, well, what do I need to let go of in order to be the person that would be able to receive this into my life? What would I need to begin to grow and to cultivate and develop within me in order to be ready to receive this into my life? So it's actually quite an active process. The calling in the one process is about setting an intention. And a lot of times I say, do it in time. Say by the end of this year or by my next birthday.
But okay, so let's speak about intention because that's very interesting too. Now, does that work? Because then my mind or my heart is saying, no, I believe in divine intervention. I believe in divine timing. I believe this is a mystery that I can't control this, you know? If it's meant to happen, he will be there, I will be there at the same time. Because when I hear many love stories, it was just so coincidental, you know, how they met, like coincidental in a way.
Well, so what we're awakening in calling in the one is the co-creative process. And, on some level, I think we're always living inside of that co-creative process. What do we want professionally? What do we want around our health? So we live an intentional life. But then when things happen that are not aligned with that, if you trust life and you're aligned with the overall goodness of life, then you surrender to that. But you know that you were not the problem. You see? You know that you lived true to your own dreams and desires. Michael Beckwith said, don't wait for your dreams to come true. Become true to your dreams. So calling in the one is about becoming true to your dreams. Ultimately, you have a fundamental belief in the overall goodness of life. But there's nothing wrong with saying to life, this is my desire, and I'm going to live as though this future were true. I'm going to be ready for my date with destiny. And I'm going to also surrender because there might be something larger than me that I can't see. There might be something larger that life has in store for me. It might be that my beloved is finishing up an old relationship, or he's tending to other things and he's not ready yet, or she needs some further lessons before it's the right timing for me. But I'm going to say, because the hunger in my heart, the desire in my heart is so deep, I'm not going to live passively. I'm going to live actively. I'm going to become that person. I'm going to be alert and awake and ready. And then so if you get to the end of your time, you say, okay, well, I set this intention for the end of the year and it didn't happen. Does that mean that, I failed? Well, no, because if you've done the process correctly, you're now a wiser, more alive, more engaged, more successful person, and you are more ready. And then you can pay, then you say patient expectancy. I'm going to trust life. Life has a different agenda. I'll recreate a commitment and an intention. But it's really wonderful, to live from what I say, the future backwards, the future that you're committed to creating, and begin to identify with that future, right? So that it's more like this inquiry, like, well, who am I in that relationship? And let me start being her now. Let me start showing up with more confidence. Let me start showing up with a deeper sense of safety and security, with a sense of, sensual aliveness. Who would I be being if I knew that I was loved? If I knew that somebody had my back, how would I do this day? You want to start to model who you're being after the future, not after the past. And a lot of us are kind of oriented, well, my mother didn't love me, my father made this mistake, I had a narcissistic, older brother who hated me, and we're kind of identified with that self, and we're living like we're trying to overcome that. But there's a leap that can happen when you start to imagine that you already have the love of your life present and available with you, and you begin to identify with that version of yourself and model yourself after that future.
Do you think that it just sounds a bit difficult to me? I heard it before. It's kind of the same approach as a secret and manifesting things in a way that you think that you see yourself doing it, but my mind is saying, well, it's not true. Like, how many times does it take to do this? Is it something you need to practice again and again and again? Like, meditate on it every day?
Well, it is a practice. I think meditating on it every day is good. And I actually have for your listeners, I have a free meditation. It's a 10-minute meditation that you can do every day that I take you through. And yes, that will strengthen you and you will begin to show up differently. And it's really, I think what you're talking about though is waking up to yourself as a co-creator with life, and moving out of a sense like of passivity, and where you're kind of at the mercy of the powers that be, whether you call that God or higher power or cosmic intelligence, or but you're going to pray for love to come to you, and you're just going to passively wait for that, as opposed to recognizing that you have a say in how life happens. And the best way I can give you an analogy of it is, it's, let's say you had a hunger to be a successful career person, a successful coach, or a successful therapist. You wouldn't just wait in your room and pray to be a successful coach, right? There's ways that you begin to train yourself on the ways of coaching, and you begin to show up and generate a beautiful, conversation that you have on your website, where you interview thought leaders, and you begin to be a student of love, and you begin to learn about, I switched, but a student of coaching techniques. Like, you actually are in action. It's still a matter of faith. Will I be able to create a thriving practice? Will I be able to ever leave my day job? I don't know. How many people actually make a living as a coach? I don't know. But you see, you're actually engaging the process. That makes sense to you?
Yeah.
So calling in the one is just engaging the process. And it's trusting yourself as a powerful co-creator along with life, because you're going to make different choices inside of a commitment to manifest that future than just kind of passively waiting for love to happen. So the kinds of things that came up for me in the calling in the one process were, I started to notice what my agreements were, like what some of the old agreements were. Because I'm sitting in meditation, and the offering that I'm making, this 10 minutes every morning, just sitting and listening. Who would I need to be? What would I need to give up? What would I need to cultivate? And one of the things I started to kind of just get a little nudge about was the agreements that I had with my mother and my grandmother. I thought, well, what are the agreements that I have? What's bonding us together through this kind of matriarchal lineage of strong, powerful, firstborn women in our family? And I realized that my mother and my grandmother and I had what we call like a little roll your eyes in your head club. So you talk about the men, and you go, like that, oh yeah, he's ne'er-do-well, or he's, of course he's messing up the money again, and of course he's drinking too much again, or whatever that story was. And I realized that we had created like a little way to bond together and actually be close by diminishing the men, right? Something simple like that. And so I had this sense like, you have to give that up. Like, you can't want to call in a wonderful love with a man you respect and admire and stay a member of this club. You're going to have to leave the club. So it was simple, right? But the next time that I was talking to my mother and saying something, to her, and we had that moment where she said something about her husband, and it was a little bit, loving, but a little bit of a edge to it. I didn't join in and say, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I just was silent. And it was kind of awkward between us. It was also, I realized in that part about agreements, I realized that I had made a promise years and years before with a boyfriend from high school. We had a very traumatic breakup. And somewhere in the midst of that breakup, I was so distraught that I said, because we couldn't, agree on life path. I was just 18, and I wanted to go to college, and he didn't want me to go to college. And it was just one of those, we can't cross this chasm. And so I made an agreement with him. I said, well, let's just go our separate ways. And when we're in our 60s, after we've made all of our decisions in life, we'll come back and then we'll marry. And of course, he thought that was ridiculous, but it stuck for me. It somehow made the pain less acute. Somehow, I could look forward to seeing him again. Of course, he went on and married someone else and had 3 children with that person, which severed our connection. But I dreamt about him for many, many years. And that agreement, I realized, was kind of lodged in the back of my mind. And so when I went to say, okay, I'm setting my intention for love, and what's in the way of me being able to show up fully? And that agreement came up for me. And I didn't want to call him to ruin his marriage. What he had was many, many years later. But I did go into a meditation. I imagined him sitting in front of me, and I had a conversation with him about completing that agreement, and told him why I couldn't keep the agreement anymore. And when I came out of that meditation, I felt lighter. I felt free. I never had another dream about him again. And I'd been dreaming about him for 20 years. Now, the interesting thing about that is that when I finally connected with him about 8 years later, because I'd written about that in The Calling in the One book, and of course somebody brought that to his attention and then reconnected us. So we had this very emotional conversation on the phone. He was still married, so it was like a little bit, we try to not cross any boundaries. But basically the emotion was to apologize to each other, for having hurt each other so much and having such an ugly breakup. And he confessed to me that he dreamt about me for 20 years too. And I asked him, when did the dreams stop? And he said, about 8 years ago. Right, so that points to the non-locality. We are connected even to old loves. And that's so there's a lot of things that's like anchoring us in the past that we actually have to unplug to get ourselves ready for love. And of course, the upshot of that story is I then called in my husband in a very magical way.
Yes.
Right?
And I wanted to ask you to tell that story, because that's such a beautiful story, and it makes me really believe, and it's always great to hear your story, because how did this book happen? You know?
Well, I was in my early 40s, and I'd never been married, and I was sad about that because I'd always wanted to have a child, and felt kind of just sad and a little brokenhearted about it, but was doing what most of us do, creating a meaningful life that was rich in contribution and activities that meant something to me. But it felt like a failure of some sort, like something hadn't happened that was important to me. And then when I was 41, I had the privilege of joining this group that was about setting intentions. So this is where I really learned about this intention setting. Most of them were professional intentions. They were about, I want to double my income, I'm going to buy my first home, I'm going to expand my business. But I had this pattern of unavailable men in my life. So even though I wanted love, I just kept, I was kind of stuck in this pattern. Which I could trace back to my childhood because my father left when I was very young. So I was always kind of idealizing the man who wasn't there. And so somehow that translated into a pattern of unavailable men. So, married men would get crushes on me, men who were engaged or had another obligation somewhere, alcoholic men, commitment-focused men, like any size or shape of unavailability. And I would get myself entangled in one drama after another. So I had just had another disappointment with actually a man who was a widower. And I thought, okay, I'm getting this right now because there's no other person in the space. And then after about 6 months, he ended up asking someone else out for New Year's Eve and not me, which was very disappointing to me. And then he explained to me that I really was just a transitional relationship for him. So see, there was still this whole unavailability pattern. So I was so disgusted with this pattern that I went to this group and I said, okay, I'm going to set a really outrageous intention to be engaged by my 42nd birthday. That was 8 months away. I had no prospects for a mate. I had no right to hope for that. But I did set that intention. And fortunately, a friend of mine who was in that group when I shared that with her, she said to me, Katherine, I will hold that intention with you if you give me permission to hold you accountable to become the woman that you would need to be in order for that to happen. And that was amazing that she said that, because it shifted my focus from running out to try and find love to going within to seek and dissolve all the barriers that I had built against it. And so I became willing to see myself as source and to take personal responsibility for, how this was playing out over and over. Even though it felt like it was happening to me, I was standing in the question, okay, how is this happening through me? How is this happening through my own consciousness? And so I would sit every morning in meditation and prayer, and I would just listen and see what needed to really transform within me to change and shift this pattern. And as I'm sharing, some of the things that came to me had to do with old agreements. Another one was some resentment that I had towards a former love. And I realized who had, I think, behaved very poorly. I still think he behaved pretty poorly. But rather than have my focus on him, I turned my focus on myself. Well, how was I colluding in my own demise? How was I participating? And when I looked from that perspective, even though it looked on an overt level like he was, 97% wrong, when I turned towards my 3%, I didn't speak up. I didn't set my boundaries. I didn't negotiate properly at the beginning of the relationship. I was overgiving as a way to try and prove my value. All of these things that kind of set me up to be disappointed in love. And I took responsibility for those things. And you see, when I turned towards my 3%, then I could actually trust myself moving forward to open my heart up again to love. Because I knew that I was trustworthy at that point. And it wasn't, and so in holding on to the resentment, my focus is out there. I'm looking at what the other person did. I'm not looking at myself and taking responsibility for my part in things. But that's where the transformation is. So that's another completion of the past. I also looked at some of the core beliefs that I was inside of. And for me, I was, from my childhood, just doubting my own value. I had a sense that I would always be alone. I had a very strong sense of being called to service. So I felt like I was here to serve, and I wasn't sure that that meant that I would have a partner. So I had a lot of things in my own consciousness. And inside of that consciousness, I would show up in relationships in a particular way that kind of fed into that happening over and over again. So again, it would feel like it was happening to me. But how is aloneness happening through me? Well, if I don't really ever, find a way to be transparent, if I don't take the risk of transparency, for instance, if I'm so focused on, I'm afraid someone's going to leave me, so I'm going to people please them, for instance, it essentially leaves me alone in the relationship, or it gives me a pattern of self-abandoning that then gets mirrored back to me, where someone else could then just easily abandon me because they don't really have a sense of me. Like there's a way Katherine's not even really showing up, like there's no Katherine to love. So I started to look at all of these things and shift them. When I would see them, I would change them. So about several weeks into this process, I'm living as though I'm going to be engaged for my 42nd birthday. I have like no way of knowing how in the world to make that happen because it had never happened before, and I'd been wanting to get married for about 2 decades at that point. So it was clear I didn't know how to make it happen, but I was being true to the process. And several weeks in, I started to think about this man named Mark that I had dated 6 years earlier, who I'd always thought of as the one that got away. I had an impulse to call him. I did not call him because I was absolutely sure that he was married with children already. 2 weeks after that, I went to a church service at a community that I'd been attending services at for about 10 years. Had never seen Mark there, and I look up and lo and behold, there he is across the parking lot. And I had a bit of a shy attack, so I did not go and say hello. And he left, and I said what we always say to ourselves, well, I guess it wasn't meant to be. So 2 weeks after that, a friend of mine was telling me I needed to go online. And I didn't want to go online. And this was a long time ago. This was 15 years ago, and very few people were online. So at that point, nobody even had their pictures up. It just was very new. But there were 250,000 people on this site. I put in all of my stats, and 80 potential people came back. I read through about 30, and I only responded to one completely anonymously with very few identifying characteristics. And when that gentleman wrote me back the next day, he sent me an email, and his name was in parentheses, and it was Mark.
I can't believe it. It's like, it's magical, How is that possible? Well, I understand how it's possible. I have a theory, but still, it's just so magical.
Well, what's your theory?
Well, a part of me thinks that were meant to meet each other, that you might have an agreement before you come down to this earth.
Yeah.
And since you opened up and did your work, the timing was good for both of you. Because I also do think that the destiny is not set in stone. Like, we have free will, that we can go different directions. So you could have chosen one of the other guys and stayed in a bad relationship, but you didn't. So you had, I guess, I guess I'm thinking that we might have, several potential mates. It just depends on, what you're saying, what level we're at what we will attract.
Right. Very nice. Very nice.
Well, good.
So Mark and I were married the following year, and then I gave birth to our daughter when I was 43. So, once I created that miracle for myself, I decided to start teaching people, and I figured out there were 7 distinct steps that I did, and I could translate those to others. And then it started to work for other people. And that's why the book has been so successful, because it actually works. And that magic about the program, it's almost like the book has a certain magic to it. A lot of times people say they buy the book, they put it on their nightstand, and all of a sudden they'll get a call from a former love from 10 years ago apologizing.
Wow.
For his behavior. I have things like that over and over again. So it is, it is a book that kind of has its own destiny, and I'm really thrilled to be talking to you, about it, and that you're sharing the book with your friends now too.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting, and I love, self-development, and especially that part of it, and that you were saying that it's not all about, finding that one, that's the goal. Is actually, just developing and becoming more of who you are, more authentic, and then, what will show up in a way that you surrender and have faith. But I just want to hear, because you're not married anymore. And was that why you started the unconscious coupling? Because you managed as well to have an conscious, yeah.
And it's really interesting. So after 10 years, we uncoupled, and Gwyneth Paltrow actually got the expression from me, not from me directly, but from a mutual friend. And when we uncoupled, we were so thoughtful of one another, and so mutually supportive of each other. And I don't think a harsh word, mean word crossed between us, actually. I mean, not that everybody has to be like that. We had a tendency to speak in very kind ways to each other. That's kind of the culture of our relationship. But we did decide to unpartner. And then when we did it in such a gracious way. And I deal with so many people who are in the midst of gnarly, nasty, horrible breakups that I decided to create a program around that too. So that's a 5-step process about how to exit a relationship in a way that creates a lot of cohesion, particularly for our daughter. And we're great co-parents now together. We work together very, very well. In some ways, I think we're kind of the model couple for uncoupling. So it's an interesting destiny that I had with him, because I sometimes think, it could not have been more perfect, because I have a beautiful relationship with him, and we modeled for the world how to, consciously couple, and then how to consciously uncouple.
Wow. Well, I know you have to go, Catherine, but this has been so inspiring, and you're such a great model for all of us. It's so inspiring, and I really feel the wanting to, develop myself to go into this and to transform, And I know that you're working with Claire Zamet as well.
Yeah.
Yes, and you have feminine power, so you have so much going on that is focusing on how to become the best you, and you're such a great model for that, and that's so inspiring.
Well, thank you. It's been so lovely to be with you and everyone in your community. And I do have some free audios if anyone is interested in downloading a free conscious uncoupling audio or free calling in the one audio on my website, katherinewoodwardthomas.com.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you so much for watching, guys. And I can really recommend Calling in the One 7 weeks to track the love of your life. And you can buy it on my site. Much light. Bye bye.